Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the last session, but a very pivotal and an important one because I'm glad that towards the end of the previous session, everybody got gravitated to the main point, which is the charging infra. And when we look at charging infra, we dissect it from all possible angles. It seems that everything is right with the world, except if you can just establish more charging infra and then EV will take off. I think it's a much deeper conundrum to solve than to have that simplistic view that all we need to have is increase the density of the charging infra. And sometimes the comparison is always given that, look at the petrol pump density and how are we going to reach to that density? And then you counter question always that and saying that, well, that density got created over 100 years. We are trying to compete with that something, an asset that got created over 100 years to something we want to do it over 18 months. And I think there couldn't have been a better panel to discuss this. Our topic is very, very interesting because we're talking about overcoming regulatory, technical, and commercial challenges for EV charging infra. We've got representation from the government, we've got representation from leading charge point operators, we've got representation from technical team leads who have been thinking and building those chargers. So the way we will keep it is fast, short. We will leave some time and room for some questions. So let's dive into it. I think as we start to think about the infra, let's look at it from a perspective that the charging infra in India was led by the government to begin with. Before anybody else stepped in, it was the government that thought about it, put the right framework, started to think about a policy framework. FAME 1 came, FAME 2 came. And because of those initial impetus to those movements, that we had certain amount of initial charges that came out. We have Randheer among us. Randheer heads the EV at the NITI, all the policy framework. He's the director there, a great friend. And I think you have a very deep insight in terms of what's happening both at the national level and also in terms of what the global perspective is coming in. So if you can, Randheer, can talk about how is government looking at, the first 10 overs have been played well, the Rohit Sharmas have hit few balls out of the park, and now the main infrastructure building period, the next 10 overs of the match are on. How is government trying to think about facilitating the adoption of the infra? What are some of the policies that are under discussions that may prompt this further?
Thanks, Pankaj. And charging infra session is at last. In fact, vehicles should be charged first. So somehow it has been dragged till now. Now coming to some of the policies, in fact, you rightly said that, FAME 1, I cannot attribute FAME 1 fully to the charging side. 1,000 crores were allocated in the FAME 2. But having said so, there was a void of the standards which was there. And although the ETD 5.1 for the charging infra, that was working since 2019, and in the early 2020 only some of the standards started publishing. 17017 is the series which is now has been fixed, and I joined the the VIS review committee in 2020 only, and after that we pushed through. 17 standards are already out, and this is one area. It's not only the regulatory side. In fact, of course, the standard is also a regulatory side, but standards in itself means nothing until and unless they are either mandated or the the organizations outside adopts them. And now the next leg of this is about the same. This is the mandating some of those standards is what we'll be doing. There are certain reasons which are quite in open, and it won't be appropriate for me to name them, which has triggered that some more standards should come, more stringent conditions should come, and those standards which are right now just lying there. In fact, most of you might not be even aware that 17 standards are there for the charging infra alone, and 5 are in writing stage. In fact, at the consultation stage would be the right word. And this leaves the 4 standards for the battery swapping, which are totally separate. So there are a lot of work from the technical side which has been done by the DST. In fact, nobody here from the DST, but most of you might be aware about the Sajid, who leads the ETD51, or now the chairman has been changed. From the government side, in fact, yes, EESL is the one who is working on these charging part, but the Ministry of Power is the nodal agency, and Ministry of Power has actually revised the charging guidelines. A lot of good things has come out in January this year when this has been revised. Average cost, ACOS has been fixed, single part tariff has been fixed. Service charge states has to fix on the charging infra. And there are two types of incentives. One is fiscal, one is the non-fiscal. Fiscal directly impacts the thinking of the providers, but the non-fiscal incentives are the one which actually facilitates the adoption, wider adoption, and that is where these ministries comes into play. How they can facilitate this wider adoption through non-fiscal incentives, which is what Ministry of Power has done. In addition to this, even the state governments in their EV policies, they have also given a lot of incentives, which also includes the availability of the land. Of course, I'm talking about the public charging stations here. But as an industry also, a lot of things people have to do. One is the localization of the very, very simple things like the converters. I don't see a charge point more than a rectifier. It's a next version of the rectifier is what the charging infra for me is. Of course, a bit sophisticated with the communication part and all. But definitely it has to be localized. I understand MOSFET and IGBTs cannot be localized, but rest all things has to be localized. And this is what industry also needs to do and gear up. Within the auto PLI also, the EV parts are there. And in fact, charging infra also forms part of that. And one important thing which I think I should add here is there was a panel just before us about the financing. Which currently, the financing is something which is the talk of the town for the EVs. But the good part is in this budget announcement, dense charging infra has become part of the harmonized list. In fact, we made a lot of efforts to get that included. So this is something good from the charging infra side. Yeah, I think a lot has been done and it's still in progress. In fact, in the guidelines, 3 by 3 kilometer grid, that is what in urban areas is the target. Within 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer, there has to be one charging point. This is the government effort wise. On the highways, I'm talking about the 4 million plus population cities initially to target with limited resources we have initially. And then every 25 kilometer, one slow charging, every 100 kilometer on either side of the highways, one fast charging. This is also in public domain.
Fantastic. I think in India that with 3 by 3 grid matrix of a charging infra is something that, fully supportive. I think that's a great vision to have from the government side. I think everybody is looking forward to that enablement. And I think if that comes up, I think we will have, the fundamental would have answered the chicken and egg problem that has been going around. I'm also delighted that you touched upon the fact that there has to be a lot more focus on indigenization of the technology. This is something that we can definitely build in India, for India. We are heavily dependent. I mean, if you're looking at lithium-ion cell, the lithium is not available, so we may have to source it. But here it's fundamental basic engineering, electronics, power electronics. And I'm super excited that you talked about it, and there's nobody better than to kind of take that lever on than maybe perhaps Atul. When we talk about indigenization, can I twist this around? Why is our indigenization still held up at 18-20%? Why don't we make, lithium-ion cell, we as a company make it, we know how complex it is. And with due credit to and due respect to EVComs and the others who are making chargers, it feels that that's more of an electronic problem than material science. Why do we have such low indigenization, and what is the roadmap, technological roadmap, to get that indigenization done heavier and higher?
So your question is about chargers or cells?
Question is about the chargers, not the cells. Cells I'll take care if I can. We will build it in India, but chargers, if you can light it up.
So I think, maybe I'll answer this question as well, but let me just, build the context for, what I'm going to answer, is that charging infrastructure is an extremely important aspect for our EV ecosystem to evolve for sure, and government has done what it has done, and it is doing what it is supposed to do in terms of incentivization, standards, and so many other things. But my take on charging infrastructure is that it's an infrastructure which we are building for a long term, right? We can't be building a charging infrastructure which is supposed to be done just now, right? And why I'm saying this is because it's a very important piece which will help in the enablement of the overall ecosystem. Let's put it something similar to what the road network is, right? We are sitting very close to a place which has a very wide road, probably the widest of the roads, highways, is right here, Delhi-Gurgaon border, right? We've all seen this. And we've seen the impact till the time there was a toll, and even today, in spite of having such a wide road, you still have traffic jams, right? So what I'm trying to build on is that you can build an infrastructure, but if it is not well designed, it will still lead to bottlenecks. We need to understand it from that perspective. Charging infrastructure is way more complex, as you rightly said in the beginning, than just saying that we need chargers. That's just the one statement, one small part of the charging infrastructure building. It involves planning, which is equivalent to what needs to be planned for the roads and highways. It also involves a play of electricity grid. You can't just put chargers and not have the electricity to back it up, because we all need fast charging, by the way, right? We also need to know not just about the standard, but also about the overall, how the connector is going to be, how the safety is going to be, how the connector on the vehicle side is going to be, so many things, right? And we need to answer these questions before we really get on to, building chargers. So don't get me wrong when I say that 3x3 is not going to solve the problem. 3x3 is a good idea, right? But do we really have that kind of a planning going on to install the chargers? And I'll give you some examples, right? We've had tenders, and in fact, I was having a chat with Awadhesh during the lunch. We've had tenders which said AC01 and DC01, and for a long time it continued, whereas the industry never had those kind of vehicles. The industry is coming out with cars which are more towards CCS, right? Now this is an infrastructure which has been installed or has been planned in a way which is not really in the sync for long term, right? And this is an asset which we build for the nation, which is built for the society, and to a large extent there is a contribution by the society in this. And if it is not useful to them, and this is one of the parts. Second, when I said about the electricity grid, again, it's a very, very important thing. When we build the charging infrastructure, we need to not just provide the electricity. Again, this is a very simplistic view of saying that there should be an electricity connection. It has to be adequate connection. There has to be the right kind of regulation behind it. By the way, today CEA guidelines says that there should be no reverse power flow from the charger, right? Whereas if that is the condition, then it is going to create havoc for the grid in future, because it's going to be injecting a lot of harmonics. It's going to also create a lot of over voltage kind of, under voltage kind of conditions. And unless we have bidirectional flow of electricity, it's not going to be a managed grid at all. So this is the basic context. And now coming to your question, which you said that, why indigenization is not happening, is I think this is one of the bigger reasons, because what we are trying to do is we are trying to build a charging infrastructure very quickly with whatever is available, with a very, very, I would say, broad theme, saying that we need to put X number of chargers, therefore, we need to have this kind of a density. Of course, we need to talk about these subjects also. I'm not saying that we should not talk about charging infrastructure density or, the locations, etc. But let's not focus only on these. Let's focus on the detailed planning. And once that clarity emerges, I am sure there are Indian entrepreneurs who have already, who are already in the process of designing, but they need clarity on what is going to be the future. I can't, as an entrepreneur, invest into a product building and later on realize, and we've seen that, you know, AC01 and DC001 are today, you know, almost sort of dead, and people have invested in that. So I think this kind of a clarity on next 10, 15 years will give a lot of vision to the indigenization piece as well. This is what probably I would like to say.
I'm actually quite delighted you talked about AC001 and DC001. So, yes, the government set up the Bharat DC001, and when we as a company started up, we were always proponent of the fact that we're not going to build a vehicle for range. India is not asking for range, but for fast charge. And we looked at the existing infra which was there by the government of India. The Bharat DC001 protocol was available. Looking at that protocol, we were able to design the battery packs that can use that infra which was already there. And hence, because that infra was there, we were able to, you know, fast charge a scooter in 10 minutes, a three-wheeler in 35 minutes. So I think I'm very hopeful that the infra which has already been invested into will not lie idle. Like we as a company have gone ahead and utilized Bharat DC001. I'm pretty sure that as a new one come up, we will have the capitalized utilization of that also take off. So I'm very hopeful for that. But when we talk about utilization, we're talking about, we can divide that utilization into land, load, and utilization. Primarily, those are the three, you know, in a pyramidal system, those are the three elements that you're trying to connect when you really think about an infra that comes up. Maxson, you kind of led that, you've seen that, you breathe. I think every morning you get up, you think about land, load, utilization every day, right? So would be nice to hear it from your perspective. How do you dissect this triangle of land, load, and utilization?
Right. The dissection starts by unpeeling the entire charging ecosystem. And every time someone says charging as a, in one word, I know that there's so many layers that the person doesn't really understand. Because for us, we've dissected it into the following parts. One is destination charging, which is homes and offices. You have to think of it very differently. Then there is public charging, which is in city and outside city, which slightly operates very differently.
Yeah.
Then there is fleet charging. And once you dissect it, then it's also charging by the types of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler. So it's a complex matrix, and what we have chosen to find what is our play. And we honestly went with all of them. We set up India's first residential charging, community chargers, public charging infrastructure. But we soon realized the utilization is akin to how many, where is the adoption of the electric vehicles. And that's in fleet charging. Right? At this point in time, we realized public charging, incidentally, globally, the highest utilization is around 26% typically. And what we realized is investing that far and for that long may not be the right play. Fleet charging, incidentally, is a very interesting prospect where the utilizations are more than 60%. And fortunately for us, for those of you who do not know Magenta, we also have a fleet operations, incidentally Bangalore's largest already. So that feeds into our utilization, but I don't want to use that as the model. Coming to the land aspect of it, of course, as a company which was invested in by HPCL, we have access to their petrol pumps and we've been working with them. But that may kickstart the entire ecosystem, but that's not where it is going to end. Right? So we tied up with companies or highway hotels. Fern, it's a three-star hotel, it's on the highways. 72 of them across India, where we worked out a model by way which we are setting up charging infrastructure for them. Now, so since this is an infra play, and I borrow words from Awadhesh, it's an infra tech play, if I were to put it. So a charging company will have to manage this entire triangle, like we said, land. You'll have to operate with someone else, right? And coming to one, just touch base on the indigenization part of it, which is the hardware. Is the fact that there are companies who are doing a lot of indigenization right now in India as far as chargers, maybe not DC chargers, a lot in the AC charger space, but they're building out in that. So our ability is that that's also another aspect on the hardware side which needs to be catered to. Now, if a company decides to go into only one space, it's going to be a pretty complex and long-term game for someone to say, I'll put up a lot of public charging. Either you start off with a mix of those, or you focus on the one which gives you the highest revenue, and then you build up the model. But of course, in that case, what happens is the classical chicken and egg story. Someone for the government of India now is expecting the private agencies to put up the charging infrastructure, where the private agencies may start to say a very studied view now. Right? Earlier there was a push to say, hey, let's all put up charging infrastructure, but now there is a lot more awareness, there's a lot more mathematics around, business mathematics around putting it up. And hence, charging players like us at least are looking at where it will, where the return on investment is highest. Earlier it was, a return on infrastructure, rather putting up, but right now that model has changed. For us at Magenta, it has moved, skewed totally towards the fleet charging. In fact, right now we have 80% fleet charging and 20% public charging. And of course, residential charging is another place which will all catch up. So this is how I think it's important to peel the onion, find your play, and then, and given the fact that there are so many now charging infrastructure players, each one will specialize. That's my personal view. Each one will find his own space and start to find models. Because it's not only about putting up charging, it's about asset management. I mean, today, if I were to put chargers across India, I mean, we already have chargers all the way from Kashmir, incidentally, to Kanyakumari. We operate them. And we find that there are other risks involved. So it's not only about establishing, post-establishment, there's a lot of keeping it up and running and keeping a lot of other social elements in place. So I think it's a lot more complex than putting up the charging infrastructure. Our view, we have not solved the problem yet. I don't think India has solved it. We're still yet to find a way. It's quite some time. I would say another few quarters before we start to know where this is going. This is my personal view on things. And I don't want to say a definitive answer on that. There are others on the panel who could do that as well.
No, I think, you just like Rahul Dravid played it on the front foot very well. And, but I think the other conundrum around this is it's a business. It's not an infra. Infra is just the leading front-end face of that business, but there's a lot that has gone in to establish it. It's a capex-driven. You have some other partners to kind of conduct that business because there's somebody else's land has been used, how that contract has been structured. So there is how do you conduct a business around an infra like charging? Perhaps, Awadhesh, I can bring you here onto that. That's a pretty complex piece. A lot of people, at the front end, it seems all you have to do is put two guns and it's solved. But it's far deeper than that, the business side of a charging infra. If you can lighten that up a little bit.
Yeah. So, as you rightly said, so it starts with, the first thing is that you have to find the locations, right? And at the earliest stage, it's again very important that what would be that location? Should it be a shopping mall? Should it be, as Maxson said, workplace? Should it be petrol stations or should it be highways? And ultimately, everything is dependent upon how the users are expected to behave. Whether, and that they are dependent on what the OEMs are bringing in terms of product. So if they are bringing a product which is, let's say, having a 140 kilometer range in the car, then you expect that there is no point of putting the chargers on the highways, because the people will not have the confidence to drive intercities, because the range is so small. So you will like to then start with the city, and the moment you see that the product is coming which has a 250 kilometer range or 300 kilometer range, then you say that yes, now it's a time when you should go out and put up the chargers along the highways, because then they have that kind of a threshold that yes, 250, fine. If I find one charger in between, I drive 400 kilometers, and within 400 kilometers, you are more or less to your destinations. But the larger problem comes where, the accessing the locations. That's very, very critical. And that's where we were expecting, from the governments to come support, large support. Unfortunately, though Randheer is here, and so unfortunately, that support has not come from the government, from the private sector. Definitely the public sector agencies like the CSL or REIL or NTPCs, they have got those supports, both in terms of subsidies, though as a private player, we don't want subsidy, but we want access to the locations on a level playing field. That has not happened, right? So all the important locations, because they are a government agency, and we know that in India we are operating in what kind of a business environment. So they have the access to those agencies, because remember, 70 to 80% of the public lands is owned by the public entities, like the municipal corporations, which are primarily the government owned, or the PWD or railways and all. And they always find comfort with dealing with, public agencies on a direct basis, on a bilateral basis, because they don't have to go for a tender and anything, but for the private sector, they have to go for a tender route. Tender standardization was not there. Now it has come in the Ministry of Power guidelines that what should be the revenue sharing arrangement. But then again, since there is a preference for PSUs that you can give on 1 rupee per unit of electricity revenue sharing flat, and for a private sector, it will be a threshold price, and on top of that, the private sector has to bid for that. So again, you are not creating a level playing field. So automatically, the PSUs get the preference, right? So that's the important, I would say, the piece which has still remained puzzled for the private investors. Government would be knowing the reasons that why they are preferring the PSUs, where if the government believes that this business is a loss-making business, then why to put money into the PSUs again? When the indication on the other aspects of the government is that we don't want to be into the business, where it is a loss-making, right? So that remains a puzzle to us. But then this is the support we require from the government, that create a level playing field, make the access available to the private sector. Second is on the electricity infrastructure. Because see, if you take out all the public places, then we are left with to deal with the real estate giants. And real estate giants, they can fleece everything, because they have that muscle power that they can say, fine, I fetch this much money from this parking if I give it to, let's say, a corporate house or for their employee parking. Yeah. So that is something which has to be figured out. The electricity is something where, again, the problem is, in our regulations, because we have different states having a different grid code. They have a different threshold for the LT, threshold for the HT. And mostly if you are setting up, and now the industry is moving toward the CCS, which requires a fast charging, 50 kilowatt minimum. The moment you go for a 50 to 60 kilowatt, and incidentally in India, except for one manufacturer, none of the manufacturers is manufacturing 50 kilowatt chargers. Yeah. That's again a misnomer, because our guideline says 50 kilowatt, whereas the manufacturers generally produce 60 kilowatt. And there is a reason for that one, because you started with a 15 kilowatt module on the DC001. On the same thing, they have scaled it up, 15, 30, 45, 60. So they have gone for 60. 50 is not there. It was a European and the US concept. So now the moment you go for a 60 kilowatt charger, you mostly go for a HT connections. And in the HT connections, your charger is costing you 7 lakh, HT connection will cost you 10 lakh rupees. Now how do you recover that cost from the consumer who is expecting, or even the fleet, the maximum of the fleet is expecting that because their EV cost is very high, so they expect that the charging price should be low. So charging price is low, your capex is very high. How do you, so you're making the life tougher for the private investor. So that's where these are the things I think, we need support from the government in a real sense. And that's where our recommendation was that for the under FAME 2, you have allocated 1,000 crore for the charging infrastructure. You should allocate certain amount out of those 10,000 crores also in upgrading the upstream electricity infrastructure as a country as a whole. Or maybe, in tier 1 cities or 9 cities or 4 million plus, upgrade that electricity infrastructure to an extent where it can be plug and play. So that is something which will be a real, support to the ecosystem itself.
It's lovely to hear that you're going beyond, narrating the story on the charging infra as a business, but also as how the charging infra gets at the back end supported by the energy grid. And it's fundamental. I think you hit the nail on the head. The conversation in the market is, here we have this fossil fuel that's trading at about 100 rupees per liter, and it's super expensive to do deliveries on that. The reason I want to move to an EV, first step is because my per kilometer delivery has to be lower. But if you're talking about 7 lakhs to a charger, 10 lakhs to the HT line, you have to recover the cost and the energy cost on top of it. And if that energy cost becomes heavy, it starts to then reduce the margin between an ICE vehicle delivery and an EV vehicle delivery. That fundamentally tips away the advantage. So you're right, I think that's fundamentally at the heart of ensuring that the energy is available at the cheapest that is possible. The infra is able to bring it from the grid into that car or that vehicle in the cheapest way so that you can be more sustainable per kilometer deliveries. When we think about these deliveries, when we think about this cost economics, obviously, the question is always asked to the OEMs. They say, you know what, the government produces the energy, you consume it, you deliver it. So, everybody looks at that vehicle as the ownership ends with that OEM for anything, whether it's the range, whether it's the performance, whether it's per kilometer to deliver a bread packet or a milk run. But when you take on the OEM seat, and then you start to look at a business plan and you say, this is my production, these are the 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers I'm going to produce. You obviously can only influence your own manufacturing setup. You cannot influence the rest of the universe that has to align to the adoption of that product. So perhaps, Ayush, you can share your insight when you're thinking about rolling your products out. What kind of dependencies do you first see? And what are the typical challenges that you have faced as your products have been going out into the market from a charging infra perspective?
So every industry, every department in the complete value chain of the industry has different challenges altogether. I started my journey in electric vehicles way back in 2008. That time we were facing very similar challenges, but the challenges were almost in line what we even face today. So the things has not changed drastically from last 12 years. The pace has changed a bit, I can definitely say. If I compare way back 2008 and we compare today, we still has few major challenges which were there then and today. Policies, not very clear. The subsidy, if you talk about, yes, we are getting subsidies from last few years or so, but it has been on and off in last 12 years. It goes off for some time, it comes back for some time, then it goes off. Those are the challenges what we face. Especially in the electric vehicle segment, there is no entry barrier. So it's good for the consumer. On the same side, it's bad for the same consumer. Why? Because a lot of night-buy flyers come into the segment. They don't serve. They feel this industry is lucrative from outside, and then they go back. And at the end of the day, industry suffers because the consumer who has bought this vehicle, he is not aware. He is very price sensitive. He buys the product because of the price, and then he feels like the industry has cheated it rather than the company who has manufactured or supplied the product. So that it is the second biggest challenge. And as mentioned, the supply chain, the domestic manufacturing, whether we earlier used to say about lead acid batteries, and even today when we talk about lithium-ion batteries, the cells are not manufactured in India even today. So there has been a lot of lead acid manufacturing battery companies, but unfortunately the need of electric vehicle because of the ratings or the charging requirement of the vehicle, and all those needs were not able to fulfill by the lead acid manufacturing batteries companies. But today we are still talking about that very soon in a year or two we will see a lithium-ion cell manufacturing plant. We have been discussed this, we have represented this many a times through SMEV, through our association, that any of the big like petroleum companies, all are PSUs, IOCL, BPCL, all these companies are government owned. So why not any of these companies get into the cell manufacturing? And I am talking about not today, I am talking about way back 10 years back. If that could happen today, the face of electric vehicle industry today must be completely different. So those kind of things, if we could have addressed over a period of time, I think definitely we must be in a phase where we are talking about like we could be in a phase where we could have converted our fleet of electric vehicles by 2030 and we would be selling more numbers of electric vehicles rather than what we are doing today. So I can only say that let's hope for the best, keeping our fingers crossed, that the policies, whichever will come, because even today, if we face every new changes which happens in the policy segment. So those areas should be plugged so that we have a clear-cut roadmap. Even in charging infrastructure, what is mentioned here, everyone is talking about that we have challenges when it comes to land acquisition, getting power connections, loadability and everything, where there's load on even the grid and everything. So these need to be sorted, and we have to integrate all 4 or 5 ministries who has to ensure that those directions are fulfilled and we achieve some milestones what we target for. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think one of our PSUs, if they could do a lithium-ion cell, that would be great. But when I look across the world, I was in Malaysia recently and I was talking to Petronas, it happens to be one of our investors, and the same question we asked to them. They say you have the capital, you have the manpower, you have the resources. Why haven't you entered into a lithium-ion cell manufacturing? And quote unquote, there is always this resistance that there is a big business that's going on, which is anyway driven that organization forward. And switching into something that's extremely innovative is a very heavy tech play. The lithium-ion cell is a very, very heavy tech play. That's not the DNA of that organization, and hence that has been held back. But coming back to you, Randheer, this is one question that probably everybody wants to ask you. While we talked about this charging infra and the challenges of the load land utilization and the commerce behind it, and tying all the variables to allow that infra to come up, you have been advocate and been pushing, and you have authored the battery swap policy, which has been out there. It's now under final levels of deliberation. Can you throw a light about how battery swap has been looked at to kind of solve one part of that puzzle, to kind of take a little bit of load off from that grid, or not load from the grid, but probably add to the grid? But let's say have an alternate to the fixed infra, and throw another mix to that challenge, saying here's another one that's a battery swap. And hence, rather than going into 15 charging places, you can come to one and everybody can get that utilized up.
Thanks, Pankaj. And in fact, I would like to take some of the questions which Awadhesh raised and Mr. Ayush also raised. So one thing is, let us first understand with the limited resources, nobody is at the disposal of the unlimited resources. What has to be the target? In fact, this is something which I have repeated quite a time also. One thing is that ours is a two-wheeler country, mainly. So what is the focus? Focus is 76 to 80% of that automotive segment. This is the focus number one. What is the focus number two? Public transport. That is the focus number two. What is the focus number three? Again, the lower strata population, which is the three-wheeler segment. These are the main focus. In fact, if you see the FAME 2 also, four-wheeler is not our focus. Individual passenger segment in four-wheeler is not our focus. We don't want to move the vehicle. We want to move the people. It's not about mobility is very clear. It's about moving the people, not about moving the vehicle or anything else. It's very clear. So these are the three focus areas. Now, coming to this infrastructure side, for the buses, the infrastructure has to be created at the depots mainly as of now. I'm not talking about the opportunity charging, which may come for the next 50,000 buses tender, which is under discussion as of now. So mainly the infrastructure is being created because, the buses which has been tendered even now, 5,450 buses, it's an OPEX model, and other 50,000 are also going to be an OPEX model. The onus of creating that infrastructure resides with the person who is going to take that. So that is one thing which is, I can call it's the destination based. That means they are going to start from one place, it's a fixed route, they have to come back. And then other business models will also evolve, including the opportunity charging. The next is about the two-wheelers. So we have done a survey in India also. And in fact, abroad, everywhere, there are many reports which are available. 67 to 70% of the charging happens at home or at the places of work. 67 to 70% of the charging. In case of the two-wheelers, FAME has minimum of 80 kilometers of the range. And, 17 to 20 kilometers is the passenger kilometers traveled for the individual usage. But if we go for the commercial usage in two-wheeler segment, it's 100 to 120 kilometers, not more than that. So that means you actually don't need to fully charge your vehicle, if in a commercial site, you need to top it up, right? So those charging needs can be taken care in all those places. Of course, there has to be an infra in the form of the charging points which has to be created. So the land availability and all those issues are very much specific to the individual. I wouldn't even say that for the fleet users that land availability and other things are an issue. Those are an issue for the individual passenger segment only, mainly. For the fleet users and others, they can have a fixed place wherein they can go and charge their vehicles. That need not to be right in the middle of the city. In fact, nobody would prefer, if they have the fleet, that they should have a captive charging right in the middle of the city. The land is of high value. This is one. Now there's one very specific point in terms of the three-wheelers also. So the tender is going to be finalized soon. In fact, some of the vehicles are already been finalized. This is the area wherein the charging, I would say, mostly will go through the battery swapping side. Not the passenger vehicle side, but the commercial side. Commercial side will be taken care through the captive charging. In fact, in the battery swapping policy also, we have introduced the word captive charging first time. In none of the policies you will see this, because specifically we didn't want it to leave this, or the people in dilemma that whether the captive charging will be facilitated or not. So that is the one thing which we have introduced in the battery swapping policy also. What we are targeting is the release by the end of this, not this, in fact, the next month. This is what our target is. We have already taken all the feedback. A lot of stakeholder consultations has already been done. I'm sure all of you must be aware about it. Now there are going to be the 4 parts of this battery swapping. One is the battery swapping policy. Second is the scheme. Third is the standards. The standards, when I talk about, are the interoperability standards. And the fourth is the BAS models. So we have formed a committee. In fact, yesterday was the first meeting of that committee to propose the battery as a service business models. And this not only limits for the EVs, it also includes the consumer electronics, consumer applications also. It also includes the renewable integration, and it also includes the BTM. So all these, all the 4 segments are being covered in the BAS, and we have got the people from the academia, people from the industry, think tanks, experts, individuals. So that's how the panel has been formed. So we are hopeful, and in fact, as we see now, you can see the impact of this battery swapping buzzword that even Indian Battery Swapping Association has been created. I don't know, I mean, what is the exact reason for the creation in so hush-hush, but it has been created. So that means it is right in the right at the forefront, right? And we really hope that once this policy and all these 4 facilitations are out, it would really help Indian ecosystem in this 2-wheeler and 3-wheeler, that light EV segment, to kick off in a much better and bigger way. Right now, the penetration level, even if it is 2.6%, I think there is a lot of scope, right? Still, we have 97.4% of the scope, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Pankaj, if you allow,
Yes.
so, I mean, if this is the view of the government, then I'm slightly, like to challenge the government about the thinking or about the approach. If 2-wheelers and 3-wheeler is the priority, and 4-wheeler, particularly personal vehicle, is not a priority, and that it gets reflected in the FAME too. 20,000 cars, that to the commercial cars only, no personal. I'm not going into the merit and demerit of that, that's the government's prerogative. But the point is, if that is the approach, and Randheer rightly said, that 2-wheelers is mandated to have close to around 80 kilometers of range, under the FAME 2 to qualify for the subsidy. And average, commute distance is around 17-20 kilometers. I mean, yesterday I was discussing with Naveen, and he said that, for 4 days, you don't require a charge. Maybe top up. So top up means if you do 200 watt of charging in 1 hour, that will give you about a 15-20 kilometer range. That's good enough for them. Now it means that they do not require any public charging. That's for sure. Because why would you require a public charging for dispensing 200 watts of power? That can be done with a 15 ampere socket. So you don't require for two-wheelers, public charging. Battery swapping is definitely required, that support. But then this 1,000 crore, or the first tender which came with the DHI, because see, government's actions gives the directions, the indications. That tender of the DHI, it says that 15 kilowatt DC001, and Pankaj, at that point of time, your InstaCharged battery was not existing, right, when this DHI tender came. So it's a good that Log9 has come out with a battery which is having now the potential to utilize those idle assets, right?
Correct.
But at that point of time, when the DHI came with a tender for 2,600 odd charging stations, the DC001 was a mandatory to have that one, right? For what? For the car, right? That was not your priority. That's the government's not priority. Then it says that it should have 50 kilowatt CCS and SHAdeMO charger. For what? That doesn't require, two-wheelers will not take that much of power. Then you had 100 kilowatt chargers. 100 kilowatt, I understand, that can be supported for the buses. But this 50 kilowatt or 15 kilowatt, not for the bus, right? And otherwise also the bus is, as an OPEX model, they are required to have the charging along with the bus supply at the bus depot. So for the public locations, which the different state government agencies were supposed to find out, it very clearly says that it was not intended for two-wheelers, it was not intended for bus, it was intended for car. But in the fame to the demand subsidy to the consumer, you deprive them. That I'm creating an infrastructure at the government's cost, but I don't want you to buy the car. I am just slightly, would request government to, correct this narrative, that's all. This narrative has to be corrected, otherwise we would be and the second thing, the interesting thing, Ministry of Power issued the guidelines, and Randheer also referred to that one, that the single part tariff. Now the day Ministry of Power revised this guideline on the 14th January, and they said that single part tariff and fixed cost will not be, charged till 2025. Within 2 months, one of the regulator of one of the states, they applied the fixed charge, which they were not charging for last 3 years, right? I don't know what they are reading out of these guidelines. Are they following these guidelines? Or they deliberately do not follow these guidelines? But this is what is happening. And the guideline says that the charging, on the public charging, there would be a service fee cap, right? Yeah. But on battery swapping, you have no stipulated any cap. Now on charging, you don't want to promote car, but you want to regulate that industry by allowing them to have a service fee cap. On a battery swapping, you want to promote, but there you are not regulating it. I'm not getting a clear message.
I'm happy because Randheer is here. Maybe a short answer to that, maybe Randheer.
Awadhesh, I can explain you it in detail, but because there is something which is just now waiting. So regarding the battery swapping side, once the policy is released, interoperability standards are released, all these are going to be together. Everything is going to be clear from this side. In fact, in terms of the battery swapping, even in the FAME 2, you don't get a subsidy as of now, because the interoperability is not there. Nobody wants to create the monopoly like what has happened in the Taiwan. There's only one company. When the one company is there, there is no innovation, there is no competition, there is no entry to anybody, barriers of entry are created. So all those things we don't want to be here. So that's why interoperability is the one which has to happen. Then only the money can be disbursed. It's a public money. Regarding the charging infra side, why this particular, whatever ESL is being putting, it is only for the four-wheelers. you rightly said it is only for the four-wheelers, but there is a reason behind this. There are 7,000 commercially available vehicles. In fact, in FAME 2, it's not 20,000, it's around 7,000 odd vehicles, which are there for the four-wheelers, and that too in the commercial segment side only. But the idea behind creation of this, the public charging infra is, of course, one reason was this, that some of these are going to be utilized in the bus depots and all. But then there is definitely a misconnect between the different organizations, and that's why when it comes to the mission, which is housed in the NITI Aayog, the things are now being synchronized. You have seen that last year in the June, we have revised almost everything. Aggregation model has been brought in. Every state, every city, they were issuing the tenders. In fact, we have done an analysis. 18 cities have issued their tenders with the deadline. Somebody is 25 days, 45 days, 30 days, and everybody has different, specifications. None of the companies can actually do analysis within such a short period of time in the entire country and submit their bids. It's not possible. That's why the bids tanked. But now when we open this time, the industry best rates we have got. In fact, these are almost in comparison to what is there for the diesel buses. So that's how it is about the learning process also. Nobody is perfect, of course, but then how you learn and how fast you adapt. That is what happened in the FAME 2 also. We have adapted almost everything, and all of the three things has picked up, right? Thank you.
I have one point here to make. As far as battery swapping is concerned, I really appreciate that government has taken initiative on that part to, increase the footfall or increase the utilization of vehicle, especially in two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And by bringing that battery swapping, that will definitely impact the usage of the vehicle. I'll just mention here one point which I also requested at different forums again, that interchangeability is good. It will definitely help, but it will also not create innovation. Because everyone wants to have an IP. If they want to create, or like for Log9 also for that matter, if it becomes so common, what differentiating factor it would be? What is important, I can rather suggest a very small way by which it can plug all those challenges. Interoperational will not be required. New IP can be created. A lot of people will come into the system from both battery side and the OEM side. Only one thing is required. You remove the homologation certificate which is required for every vehicle with every battery. Because this is a very cost intensive, it's very time consuming, and it's a very tedious process. If a vehicle is being tested and tried with all the parameters of government, central government, which is laid down by them under homologation, and the same way government is coming with a BIS standard certification for a battery pack, and all safety and requirement parameters are met, then we don't require any homologation for each and every battery with that of the vehicle. What we are comparing, I'd like to mention it here very clearly. Do you ensure or homologate a vehicle with every petrol manufacturing company for an IC vehicle? No, it never happens. So here we are talking about battery is a fuel. You need to homologate or make sure that the fuel is compatible with the vehicle with every battery manufacturing company. So what is required is you have to set a standard, what kind of standard ranges are required for a battery pack manufacturer, a battery cell manufacturer for that matter, which is covered under BIS. Follow those standards. Accountability need to be created so that those kind of accidents should not happen. Then the onus should be on the battery manufacturer and the OEM. Because at the end of the day, who is going to burn the finger? It is either the OEM or the battery pack manufacturers. Definitely challenges on both the hands. If I was supposed to try a battery of Log9, it took me almost 6 months to validate the battery from my end, and it took 6 months equivalent time to Log9. We are putting an investment of time, energy, manpower, everything to ensure that the vehicle when it goes on road is very well validated and tested. Yes, there are challenges where you have night by flyers who who are not aware or not in-depth knowledge about the product. But at the end of the day, it is very important that we test ourselves reduce the transition time from one pack to another, and make sure that we move in the right direction. The motive should be very clear to each one of them.
No, you're right. I think, we need to move the needle faster for the adoption to happen. And every vehicle is trying to come up with a you got to try a few batteries out for the vehicle, for the drive condition, for the users. And, I think the ecosystem has to move things through validation as fast as possible. And certain things could be given onto the battery side or to the vehicle side, where the government can take a backseat and say, as long as you guys have done through a particular standard, you followed it, it can go out in the market, and we can do, certifications as a rolling certification. So those are some of the things that can come in. I want to be sensitive to time, but Atul, I have this question that when the OEM and the battery guy solves the problem, and they come together and the product is out there, there's something very interesting that's happening. A lot of our vehicles go to the charging infrastructure. Some certain vehicles from a fleet would go and get charged every day to a certain station, and then one fine day they stop charging. And when we went and did more investigation into it, they said, oh, somebody had a small firmware upgradation. Is there a way to standardize this? Because what will happen is that the chargers will upgrade. There'll be a firmware upgradation. And the protocol will get changed. Just one line of the protocol will change, and the vehicle will not read it. On a technology, do we have a solution to kind of ensure this doesn't happen?
Well, it's not just happening when the firmware upgrade happens. In fact, there have been many incidents when somebody said that this is a CCS compatible charger and there's a CCS compatible car, but even a brand new car cannot charge, right? And somewhere it will have a spillover to what Ayush was just saying, saying that we just need to have two different certifications. Where vehicle is certified, battery is certified, and they will work. It doesn't happen like this.
No, I meant to say that the homologation part is not.
Just a reference to that. There's no need to respond to that. The point is that we are talking of an integrated system, right? An integrated system has multiple pieces. Even within the charger, there are multiple, blocks, and they all need to be tested together in such a way that it works in a harmonious way, and that's why there are various integration requirements, there are homologation requirements, etc. And I guess this is also will go back to what I said in the beginning, that we need to have a clarity on the roadmap of what we are going to see, and we need to be in tandem with those roadmaps to be able to work together with the whole ecosystem. It can't be that as a charger manufacturer, a company A is working on a roadmap and installing chargers which are either faster than the earlier ones, or they can communicate better on a newer protocol, etc., but also need to see what is there in the ecosystem. The OEMs also need to be in sync with that. Yeah. And OEMs, so that's where there has to be an interplay of roadmaps somewhere where there is a model of cooperation between all of them. And just launching a product, just coming out with a product which meets just the top theme is not going to be sufficient. As they say, devil always lies in the detail. So we need to be a detailed-oriented, sector as a whole. There's a lot to be learning to be done. Like Randheer said, you need to learn fast, and then remember those lessons, what you learned. You can't just forget those lessons. You need to, ingrain those practices into it.
You're right, and I think I always say this: feedback is the breakfast of champions, and as much as it comes, the better the product and the ecosystem becomes. I know Sid is just around the corner, so maybe we can take one or two questions before we wrap it up. Yeah, please, gentlemen.
Is this audible? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wish Randheer ji was here. So my question is very specific with relation to GST on EV charging as a service. See, right now the cost differential in terms of operation is hardly 40-50% when you compare it to ICE. And Awadhesh ji would agree, I think Fortum is charging 20% on the total amount. 18%. 18%. So that, and like assume petrol price goes down by 10% for whatever reason in future, then literally there is no incentive for anyone to buy an EV. So So I want to know, I mean, Randheer ji would have been ideal to address if they're going to cut that GST. Second thing is, my CA, for example, I mean, we are also into EV charging business. My CA said there is a possibility of a pure agent model where we charge the GST only on the service charge or the CPO commission. So how far is that legal or viable? So, I mean,
I think
both
this is Maxson or Awadhesh is...
one of you would be the
one of
person.
you
But
should
I'd
be-
like to hear from both because both of you are already in business in big time.
Yeah, so, see, I mean, we are also struggling because we want to, that end consumers, price should be as low as possible. And 18% is our compulsion under the GST regulations. But, I mean, we can't say that which is, it's legal to bifurcate this and then you do charge. But then you have an instance. Delhi tender is a classic example where as a government agencies, they come out with a tender, they said that you have to have a two-component price. One is the electricity price, which will be a pass-through, and one will be the service fee, which you will be bidding, against that one. And then, on that service fee component only there would be a GST. But I'm giving you a spin to this, a twist to this. Now, what they discovered a price is a negative price. On a service fee as a negative, right? Somebody has quoted minus 3.6, right? Now, I ask you these questions that on minus price, what would be your GST? I'll leave it there.
And I'll just complicate it a little bit more. If you were to put up a charger at any state in India, do you know that you need to have a GST for each state? Because each charger is a dispensing unit, which means it's a business entity, which means for you to put up charger and operate it, you actually need to have, for example, for us, we need to have at around 25 states, we need to have a GST. Now, these are complications. And Awadhesh and I were smiling for the sheer fact that we are fighting that battle almost on a daily basis, and there's so much amount of clarity even on that side. So it's not only, if Randheer were, and I did say that, it's not a simple thing, it's not the simplest of business, it's one of the most complicated of business, governed by so many entities and influenced by so many factors which are absolutely out of our control. Yeah. So GST is one big issue, and I think sooner or later there's going to be a lot of, as number of charging, and some taxman is going to sit and say, hey, listen, you did not pay GST or you did not do a GST filing over there. So these are complications that I'm just adding more complexity to your life as a charge point operator, but I'm hoping that sooner or later someone is going to pick up and say, listen, we need to sort this now and for later.
But as a charge point operator, what I would recommend that, see, generally the tax authorities' objective would be to maximize their revenue or their collections. I have a sense that GST authorities, some point of time, would come out with this ruling that the entire component comes under service because you are bundling so many things and then putting as a service. And remember, the Ministry of Power has came out with the guidelines which says that charging is a service. It doesn't say, because they have very clearly said, electricity, this is not the sale of electricity. So if it is not a sale of electricity, it means you cannot bifurcate electricity separately, showing that this is the sale of electricity, and that's why it is, exempted from the GST. And from the GST point of view, they want to maximize the revenue collections. So they will say that GST on the entire amount, that makes sense to them. So that's my sense.
So maybe one last question and then...
Yeah, okay, so this is related to what was brought out, that cell manufacturing by Indian PSU. Of course, there was a response that Petronas Malaysia said that, whatever is not their specialty, why should they go into that? I just wanted to know one thing, is Log9 materials, whatever batteries they have on display over here, starting from scooter to three-wheeler to the bigger batteries also, are they not good enough as a supplier to Indian market for the batteries right now? Why are we looking for Indian PSU? And if we are still insisting on Indian PSU, yes, BHEL is another alternative. I mean, why go for IOC or BPCL and things of that kind? BHEL is an alternative, but if Log9 material exists and they are manufacturing cells and manufacturing batteries, then I think we should go by them.
I can perhaps answer that. Our current manufacturing, the cell manufacturing capability of Log9 is 50 megawatt hour. We are expected to reach our giga scale in, let's say, due course of time. Even at the highest capacities that we have actually right now planned, it's something like a 5 to 10 gigawatt hour production. India requires, as per the projection, is about 120 to 150 gigawatt hour. So there's a huge gap. The demand is going to be so large. The battery packs that we're making right now today is about 250 megawatt hour production capacity is already installed. So purely from a cell perspective, even if we do it at a 10 gigawatt scale, which is a really large operations for us at this point of time, we would be less than 10% of what India requires. And I think that's where what we need is the entire ecosystem of the cell manufacturers, where the Olas and the equivalents may start to manufacture, or the Reliance starts to manufacture. So if you look at it, India overall demand is about 40 to 50 gigawatt hour. Tesla alone last year bought about 130 gigawatt hours. So what it tells you is that the scale at which India is going to expand, the demand is going to be expanding. We would probably, as Log9, we will be the leading company in terms of cell manufacturing and battery pack, and first adoption will happen, but we definitely need more cell manufacturing units, because our demand is going to be in the hundreds of gigawatts of hours, predicted till 2027 to 2030.
And I'd like to add one more thing to that. Sorry, I know that we are running late on time. So the challenge why I refer to a PSU for getting up the manufacturing, first of all, I am referring where we started our operation way back in 2008. And we are talking about putting up a plant today. This means IC vehicles already on road, and still we are planning to put up some factory to define.
I think the comment that you made is the presence of time in which the decisions were not made. Had we had started 10 years back, we have a Log9 today in 2022, 2023, the production is going on. This could have done 10 years, we could have done something about it 10 years back through a PSU model. But yeah, happy to take that offline question if possible. Yeah, I'm happy.